Hi, I'm Emma. I go to Worldview at the Abbey, and I'm just going to share just something that God's been doing in my life. So I felt called to share my most recent story, and it starts with a short story from the Bible. Matthew 14:27-32. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Peter got down out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You have little faith," he said. "Why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. A few weeks ago, this story stood out to me during my devotional time, but I wasn't really sure why. The answer didn't come right away. In fact, I just started piecing things together 2 days ago. These past 2 weeks have been tough at certain times. I'm the oldest of 7, and I'm used to being able to help my siblings, make them happy, and fix things. But lately I've run into a situation where I can't make everyone happy, and I can't help people because I can't fix the problem. I can't control things, and so I feel helpless, but this is where the story comes in. Jesus starts out by reassuring the disciples that they don't need to be afraid. It is just him. He is there, just like he tells us through Scripture, creation, and the people around us. Like Peter, we ask for signs that it's truly Jesus, and once he assures us that it is, we walk boldly towards him on the path he has for us. All is well, Jesus is in sight, and then the storm hits. We take our eyes off of Christ and start focusing on everything going on around us, and before we know it, we're sinking. This is where I've been the past 3 to 4 weeks, sinking, feeling hopeless, because I'm trying to control things that I have no control over at all. I've been so overwhelmed by things that have been going on around me that it's been a struggle to keep my eyes on Christ. I've cried out, "Lord, save me," just like Peter. I've been turning my focus back towards Christ and working on that. And in doing so, I have found that he was holding my hand the whole time, saying, "You have little faith, don't doubt." The storm isn't completely over, but it's calming. I know it will pass soon because the Lord is faithful. He's not at the end of the storm. He is in the middle, guiding us through it. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Hadassah. So if I were to use one word to describe what's been going on in my relationship with God recently, that word would be trust. He's been building my trust in a lot of ways over the past year. In the midst of graduating from high school this past spring, I remember being stressed. Yes, there were the end-of-year projects that were due, and there was graduation planning going on, but even bigger was the looming decision of what to do next year. I had no plans. I just figured I would be staying home, or close to home at least. But I decided to wait and see what God had for me. Well, of course God had a plan for me. It was a plan that brought me here to Canyon City, Colorado, 12 hours away from home and everyone that I had ever known. It brought me to Worldview at the Abbey. And I've had to trust God every step of the way. God provided the finances for me to be able to come. He provided a third car for my family that I am able to use here. And he has provided people who support me and love me, both here and back home. Many of those people are here today. But these are all things that I've had to depend on him to do. And sometimes he waited till the last minute to do it, but he still did it. Now, I don't know what I'll be doing next year, or even this summer, but I do know that I can trust God, and that he has a plan, even if I don't know what it is, and he will reveal it in whatever way he wishes at whatever time he chooses.
Howdy, I'm Hayden. Hello. Howdy. So I was going through my devotions, I think it was last week, and I read Mark 14, and something in there stood out to me. And it was the contrast between Jesus and Peter towards the end of the chapter with where Jesus answered the high priest and said, like, I am Jesus, and Peter a few verses later said, like, was denied Christ 3 times. I'll just read the passage. It starts in verse 60. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you? But he remained silent and made no answer. Again the high priest asked him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And you'll see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. And then a few verses later, as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, you also were with the Nazarene, Jesus. But he denied it, saying, I neither know nor understand what you mean. And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him and began again to say to the bystanders, this man is one of them. But again he denied it. And after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean. But he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, I do not know this man of whom you speak. And immediately the rooster cried a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And he broke down and wept. And so there's really 2 things that stood out here. Like, one is integrity, and how Jesus, he claimed to be who he acted to be. Like, he lived out the Messiah, and because he was the Messiah, and people didn't need him to say that he was the Messiah. They could tell. But when asked, he claimed, yes, I am the Messiah. But Peter didn't claim to be who he acted to be. He acted like a disciple of Jesus, and inwardly he was, but when people asked him, he denied it. And then another thing is Jesus claimed this publicly, and it had consequences for claiming it. But Peter, he was in a private setting that had little to no consequence for claiming that he was the Messiah. Not the Messiah, that he was a disciple. But he's still denied. And that kind of goes to fear. Do we fear God or fear man? Because if we fear God, then we'll do whatever he says, and because we're driven by God. But if we fear man, then we'll look around us for acclaim from people or whatever, and that will drive our actions instead of God. So that touched me, and something that I saw a short failing in some aspects of my life, and I thought I'd share that with you guys. So thank you for listening.
Good morning. I'm Ivy. So my God story happens every day. I'm blessed with a beautiful baby boy who is healthy and thriving. I'm blessed with an amazing husband who supports me and loves me. I'm blessed with my father and my mother and my brother. And I'm also blessed with everybody here. You all have shown support and care, and I want to thank you guys for that. I'm also thankful for our lovely Abby friends. They bring so much light to the young adult group. But I'm also thankful for the bad days, and I don't think I give enough credit to them. Because without the bad days, I wouldn't be able to search for God as much as I do. And I wouldn't be able to be thankful for all the things that I am. So, thank you.
When we look out at the world today, it's not that hard to see that we live among just a wicked generation where people are embracing sin, they're calling it good. Whatever. And what's being called fulfilling is only robbing people around us. I mean, I think of stimulation and pleasure. Like, people think they're so empty inside that they just try to fill the void, but nothing works because we're not meant to be filled with anything but Christ. And ultimately, I think, well, people vary, the different reasons vary from person to person, but spiritually, we have to remember that the people of the world are slaves to sin. They're slaves. They're under the control of the dark demonic forces of this world. And they live that way in this world. We are also in this world physically, but spiritually, we're a part of God's kingdom. And we're called to walk and be a witness and live a certain way while we're here, being like Christ with our families, with our friends, in our workplace, where there are some customers or coworkers that just really, really drive us crazy. And man, it'd be nice to give to them what they deserve, but that's not what we're called to do, unless you're a manager, in which case do your job. But also our friends and our neighbors and the people that always push our buttons. So how do we do that? We live mundane lives, and oftentimes when we think of God working in us, we think of the big moments, but there's a whole lot more little moments, and those are the ones that build the foundation for you to witness in the big moments. So how do we do that? Well, Philippians 2:14 through 16 says, "Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God, without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky, as you hold firmly to the word of life." And that sounds easy on paper. All right, don't fight, don't argue, until you have to go on a date, and you can only go to one restaurant. Or your siblings, man, they just need to be corrected by you specifically. And I don't think I have to tell you, you guys have way more life experience than I do. It's not that easy just to not fight about stuff. So how the heck do we do that? Well, I believe that maybe not the only scriptural answer, but the keystone of that is to live with humility. To live with the proper perspective of who we are and who God is. And we can only live with humility if we have a heart of humility, because our actions flow from our hearts. So only submitting our heart to Christ and letting Him change us will make us more like Christ, more humble like Christ, who said that He could do nothing without the Father. The Son of God, who spoke the world into existence, said He could do nothing without the Father. Christ-like humility, because if we don't have humility, we might pay lip service to these things, but our hearts are still going to be seething. So I think an excellent definition of biblical humility is found in the life of John the Baptist. He was the last of the Old Testament prophets in the tradition of the Old Testament. And he was there preparing the way of the Lord, as it says in Isaiah. And he did his ministry of baptism and preaching before Jesus started his, and also a little bit during the first portion. And so that's where we find in John chapter 3, where John is still baptizing, but Jesus has also started baptizing. And two of John's disciples get into an argument with somebody that's around. They don't name the disciples or the Jew. And then the disciples go to John, as well as the Jew, and they say, "Rabbi, that man who was with you on the other side of the Jordan, the one you testified about, look, he is baptizing, and everyone is going to him." Now I think we should focus on the last phrase, everyone is going to him. They weren't thankful that the Son of God was fulfilling his purpose. They were jealous because they became less significant, less important. And so when they ask this, they're kind of getting John to be like, hey, do something about this Jesus dude. But instead, John responds with this, and I flipped away from it. Instead, he responds with this: "A person can only receive what is given from heaven. You yourselves can testify that I said, I am not the Messiah, but I am sent ahead of him. The bride belongs to the bridegroom. The friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him, and is full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. That joy is mine, and it is now complete. He must become greater. I must become less." That is humility. And I think there are three elements of it that work together that are worth looking at. The first is the proper perspective of who God is. I know I do this a lot. And when I think about God, when we think about God in the modern day, we focus on certain aspects, and everyone's going to focus on something naturally, but we elevate those aspects above the other aspects of his character, like Jesus is the good shepherd, or, Jesus is the great physician. And while those are certainly true, John the Baptist, in this verse, his perspective and the perspective that I believe we are called to have is one of a unity where he is completely the good shepherd and the great physician, and also completely the divine judge and the king of the universe, the God that brought them out of Egypt, that parted the Red Sea, that helped them conquer the land of Canaan, the God that deserves our complete respect. I think we in modern day America miss that, the holiness and the gravity of the God that we are called to serve. But not only did John have a good picture of who God was, he had a picture of who he was as well. Yes, we are fallen and imperfect, but we are also God's children, those of us that are believers. We have been purchased. We're being made into the image of Christ, and this cannot be taken away from us. We might change our vocation, we might change certain habits, but our nature, our identity, who we are, does not change. And I think John also had a good view of that. And so I think the last thing is that God's up here and we're way down here. Like, he is absolutely transcendent, but he is also immediate. But to do that, he had to bridge the gap. He had to come down, humble himself, become a baby, a boy, a man, submit to death and beating and shame. And then he went back up again. He rose again and is seated at the right hand of God. And I talk about all those three elements because when we focus on one, we miss kind of the paradox of Christianity. Because Christianity is a paradox. It doesn't really make sense that this God, who's all-loving, who's just and righteous, would make these people and continue to love them even after they fall. And not only just continue to love them, but make a way for them to return to him. Like, it doesn't make sense, like, with our rational minds. But that's what makes the gospel story beautiful. That God chose to do all these things. That yes, he is great and mighty and powerful, as is talked about in Job chapter 38. But that he bridged that gap for reasons that we don't always quite understand because his character is so unknowable. I shouldn't say unknowable. It's so big that we cannot completely know all of its aspects. The gospel is a beautiful story of love and redemption. And that is only really brought out when those three parts of Christian humility are really put together. And so I think one very good example of Christian humility kind of lived out is in the book of Ezra. And so Ezra, he was, now I have to find it. He was an official for the Persian Empire. I think Nehemiah was a cupbearer. But he was blessed to have the responsibility of leading the people of Israel back from the captivity after the first guy, Nehemiah or something. No, whatever. He was leading the people of Israel back. And for chapter 8, he lists kind of who's going back. And then in chapter 8, he goes on to talk about him returning to Jerusalem. And so in 8 verse 21, there by the Ahava canal I proclaimed a fast, so that we might humble ourselves before our God and ask him for a safe journey for us and our children with all our possessions. He didn't just believe in God as a theological distant concept. He brought it into the mundane, into the everyday. Because I think another thing that this picture of humility does is even if we acknowledge the truth, we kind of keep it away because we have our lives that we want to live. But this affected Ezra's life practically, in the everyday, in the mundane, the things that people don't think are often important enough, just the day in, day out at your work, interacting with your family members. Christ-like humility invites Christ to enter into those things and work through those things for his glory and for the salvation of souls. Another interesting juxtaposition of humility as what it should be and what it isn't is found in the book of Matthew. And this is when the soldiers are going to the Garden of Gethsemane and when they take Jesus. So in Matthew 26, that's when one of the disciples gets out his sword and cuts off the servant of the ear of the servant. And so Then the men stepped forward, seizing Jesus and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. "Put your sword back in place," Jesus said to him, "for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must be happen in this way?" And we have this disciple who who loved Jesus and wanted to protect him and defend him, but he wasn't acting in the way that God called him to do so. And then you have Jesus, who could at any moment just not go to the cross, have legions of angels defend him, but he chose to do it. He chose to submit to suffering because he was a Messiah of humility. He submitted himself to the Father's will, submitted himself to what he would have him do. And then because of that, all the consequences of living in the will of the Father, he chose to take those on. And so I think and that's important because Christian humility is not of this world. It wasn't in Eden because they were perfect, but they didn't have the Holy Spirit inside of them. It's not in the world. It's been fallen and twisted. Christian humility is not something of this world. We are a new creation, it says in Romans. And because it is not of this world, because it is unique, it is having that humility that will allow us to do everything without grumbling and arguing. Is having that heart of surrender and submission to Christ that allows us to choose to not to grumble or argue, to choose to align our actions with the way that we're called to live. Living the Christian life, you're not always going to know the answers because people are going to notice. If you're following Christ, people are going to notice and they'll ask questions. And you might not always have the answers. Let's say if they ask about dinosaurs or aliens and stuff like that. But if you have humility, if you live with humility, both before that conversation and during, and then afterwards, your character will shine in that place. They won't see the point isn't how smart you are. The point is how much you are like Christ. And if you have a character of humility, a heart that is surrendered, they'll see that. And in this day and age, I think that presents a wonderful opportunity because people have a negative view of the church. But if we can prove them wrong, they do a complete 180. And they're like, wait a second, I thought Christians list all the bad things they talk about us, But he's not like that. And it doesn't make sense to them. So if we can prove them wrong, prove the culture wrong, we have a wonderful opportunity to speak the gospel into places. Now you have to earn it. Again, you have to live a lifestyle that is surrendered to Christ. But if you do that, you can prove the culture wrong. And not that having answers is bad, but it is, if you answer with humility, that's when you can find the common ground and redirect them to the truth. Yeah. And so I think that, yes. And so that's what it means to shine like stars. They will notice humility because it's not of this world. They will notice and they will ask. So we have to be ready to respond, not just with the correct answers, while those are good to have, but with humility, with character, that they might see Christ in us, because that's ultimately what it is. We're being made into the image of Christ. And if they see that, they want more, because they were meant to be made in the image of Christ, to be a new creation, and they're not that yet. So they have a want, they have a need, there's a lack in their life that Christ can fulfill. And when they see it in us, it is an amazing opportunity to witness. All right, and the worship team can come up as I pray. Father, thank you for this day. Thank you that you are good, that you do not change, and that in some weird and wacky, confusing way, which we don't quite have the ability to understand, you have this wonderful character, these amazing aspects, and that you came down to us, and that you're making us into the image of Christ, Lord. that you would shine through us as we're about to sing about God. Shine, Jesus, shine. That when we sing this song, that we would mean it. God, that as we ask you to search us and try us and to consume our darkness inside of us, Father, consume our sin, God, that it's a dangerous request because you're going to do it. Help us to mean it, that we may be transformed into the image of Christ, that we may be a light to this dark world and be a witness to the people that so desperately need you. In your name, amen. All right, and then you can rise as we sing the last song.